All right, so today we are looking at how to study origami tessellations. And I'm going to walk you through kind of the stages I see people going through as they learn origami tessellations. And that starts, and you can see I've got my notes here, that starts with the model mindset. So if you've been folding origami before, you probably have this mindset of, oh, I want to fold this specific result. And so I'm going to find instructions for that specific result, and I'm going to fold that. But that kind of breaks down with origami tessellations because you can fold as many repeats of the pattern as you want. It's more a matter of learning the skills needed to fold that particular pattern. And so in this model mindset stage, you'll be watching a tutorial for a specific pattern. You'll be trying to follow precisely. You won't necessarily pick up on the fact that you're doing certain moves in a certain order, and that you could do slightly different moves of the same shape in that same order and get a slightly different pattern. Then there's the stage of twists and practice. So when I'm teaching, and these that I'm going through are my tessellation starter sequence pieces, the actual ones that I use to film the videos. And so at this stage, you're learning some moves, you're starting to practice the individual twists. These structures that are twisting around and folding flat, and seeing how to practice them with one spacing, with a different spacing, so this is everything closer together. Practice them on both sides of the paper, and how to practice them on both sides with different spacings in different directions. So that's what I'm talking about with practicing these twists. So you're not just practicing the individual twist, you're also practicing how does it work when they're on alternating sides of the paper? How do I find the right spacing to the next twist? And so once you've picked up those skills, you haven't just learned those 3 or 4 individual patterns. You've learned all the possible variations of, I'm going to have this twist either on the same side or alternating sides with different amounts of spacing in between. And you've learned that for whatever size of grid you want to use, whether it's 24 or 32 or 64 or 128 divisions. That's the power of origami tessellations. You learn these skills and then you apply them to the amount of grid that you want. Then once you've been practicing twists, and there's multiple twists to practice, this is the open square as opposed to the closed square that we were looking at earlier. And you can do the same thing. You can have them all on the same side. And now we start mixing these two different twists together. So the rule for this pattern is that you have a closed square with 4 open square neighbors on the same side at tube pleat spacing. And the open square likewise has 4 closed square neighbors also at tube pleat spacing. And just from there, I get this alternating weave pattern. And I can do that on whatever size grid I want. It's just kind of mind-blowing that once you know the rules, so this is the next stage, knowing the rules of the pattern instead of just focusing on one twist, having an alternation between twists, and that those can alternate on opposite sides of the paper too. You can stop when you first hit the edge. You can do more repeats and go all the way out to the edge. There's all kinds of options. So then we start introducing different rules, different symmetry patterns. So for this one, instead of the closed square having 4 open square neighbors and vice versa, the closed square has 1 open square neighbor, and then we draw mirror symmetry lines around it and see what the pattern becomes. So this is the stage of symmetries and what I call tiling breaks. So having the awareness that all of these square patterns, whether they're alternating or mirrored, the squares all have 4 square neighbors. And if you start in the center and you do a loop around, then you have 1 square, then 9 squares, then 25 squares, if you keep adding out. And you can also start with 4 squares in the middle. So this is a closed square with an open square neighbor on the opposite side, and then draw a box around that and mirror it. So these patterns are from my course, Tessellation Starter Sequence. I also have Basic Twist Bootcamp as a kind of slightly lower level for practicing the specific basic twists. But if you really want to dive into reading crease patterns, into seeing all of these different possibilities, and notice we're still using just square twists. And you can also take, so this one took 4 of these closed squares and then spaced everything around it further away. This one takes that same group of closed squares on opposite sides and then draws a box around it and mirrors it. If you want to learn this one, that's in Tessellation Starter Sequence, and the link is in the description below. And that's just the square section. Then it moves to the triangle section. And I start with 3-way intersections of pleats, so you're not adding new folds to the paper. And one of the things that I focus on inside of Tessellation Starter Sequence is how to read the crease patterns for each of these different designs. How to recognize the twists, the mountains and valley folds that are used in a twist, and then the symmetries in the patterns. Where are the mirror lines? Where are the positions of rotational symmetry? Because with these twists, it's not just, oh, these are all closed triangle twists, therefore they're all the same. It's, well, this one is rotating around right-handedly, and this one is rotating around left-handedly, and they're connected by the pleat in between. And so being able to recognize, oh, this twist is rotating this way, and that twist is rotating that way, is really helpful in reading the crease pattern. So what I mean by reading the crease pattern is, are you able to recognize what twists are present, how they're connected, how far apart they are? That's really the information that you get from the crease pattern. And then at other levels, other stages, you can start seeing, well, how are the borders going to look? So I also include some special grids in Tessellation Starter Sequence that show, okay, this is going to have these pleats going out at this stage of folding. So I'm going to fold my grid so that the grid lines are perpendicular to the edge of the hexagon. And then I can fold my pattern in the middle and I have a nice regular border around the edge. So that's the other use of crease patterns. Beyond the what twists are present, how are they connected, how far apart are they? And just like with squares, there are open forms of the triangle as well, with this open hole on the back. And you can do the same kinds of things with them. You can alternate closed and open on the same side. You can have different spacing in different directions. Since it's triangles, you can also have different spacing in radial directions, making clusters of 6. You can have the same twist, alternating sides. You can have different twists, alternating sides. You can have some triangular chunk, just like we had some rectangular or square chunk of the square patterns. You can have some triangular chunk of the triangle patterns and mirror that everywhere. You can do that with whatever chunk you like. So the last one was closed triangle in the middle, open triangle in the corners. This one is open triangle in the middle, closed triangle in the corners. And this is another special grid lesson where we have the grid lines perpendicular to the edges, but we are also centered on a grid triangle. So that's another useful skill to learn. You can take these triangle chunks and alternate sides. You can do that even if the twists inside of the chunk themselves are alternating sides. And that brings us to the hexagons. So we had squares, we had triangles. Hexagons are the next step in these basic twists of adding a little bit more complexity. So this one is going to be a little bit harder to unfold in particular. And you can have this hexagon twisting around. So notice this is a very drawn up hexagon, or like there's a lot of drawing on this. This is the crease pattern. This is how you start reading the crease pattern, by saying, okay, these are the pleats leading into the place that I'm interested in. Well, if I fold those pleats, then the center is going to come along for the ride. And so we can use this hexagon in a variety of ways. We can alternate it with triangles on the same side. We can alternate it with whichever triangle we like. It doesn't matter. As long as the hexagon has 6 triangle neighbors, the triangle has 3 hexagon neighbors, then the pattern will work out. And we can bring in our next twist, the open hexagon, which has that open hole on the back. We can do the same thing with the open hexagon with whatever triangle we like. We can have these triangles on the opposite side from the hexagon. So as we're going through learning these basic structures, we then start running into things that are not exactly the same. We start seeing, oh, actually, this hexagon doesn't have to be the same as that hexagon. And this is something that I only learned once I already started teaching origami tessellations. So we can start seeing, oh, there's more options here. There's more possibilities. And we start being able to say, well, I want this to be this way. I want this to be that way, instead of this pattern that I'm presented with. And that can make a huge difference in the end result. And that's getting more into the designer mindset of, like, I'm getting into the rhombus. I have some structure. And in Tessellation Starter Sequence, I only teach the closed rhombus because I'm only doing 50 lessons. I kept myself to the 8 basic twists of closed and open triangle, closed and open square, closed and open triangle, closed and open hexagon, rhombus, and right triangle. And that will serve you for a huge number of patterns. But if you also, say, watch my YouTube videos, and there's a series that I have coming up that I'm going to just hint at right now. It's called Summer of Twists. And instead of 8 twists, I'm going to be teaching 30 different twists in short videos. Keep your eye on this channel starting next month. Or I should say June 2024. So if you have other rhombus twists, the open rhombus, the mixed depth rhombus, the hybrid rhombus, you can start using those in these structures as well. Now the mixed depth one has some extra characteristics that make it not as connectable with other rhombuses, but that I'll leave that for the mixed depth rhombus lesson. And you start seeing these other structures. So the last one was alternating rhombi. This one has rhombi and triangles in this 3-twist chunk that's repeated over and over. And that shows up again, mirrored on the back. So what if you used a different triangle? What if you used a triangle on the different side than the rhombus? These are the questions you start asking yourself as you move into that designer phase, that reading from crease patterns, reverse engineering from photos phase of folding tessellations, where you can fold anything you like. So once you've mastered the building blocks, the twists, and you've started to see the symmetries of, well, this hexagon is in a position of 6-fold rotational symmetry. There are 6 things around it that are the same. This rhombus is in a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry. The things on opposite sides of it are the same. And with a little bit of math, you'll know, and by math I mean memorization, you'll know that there needs to be a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. Whenever you have a 6-fold rotational symmetry, you also have 2 and 3. And so if you know that this is a 2, that gets you where these triangles are on the opposite side. It tells you that there needs to be a hexagon on the far side of those triangles. And that hexagon is going to be an exact repeat of the center. Now, it just so happens to work out that if you build out from there, you end up with 3 of the same thing around these open spaces. So this is the big breakthrough when you go from following tutorials exactly to using the structure that's taught in the tutorial to fold a different pattern with the same connectivity. And this structure has so many different patterns available because it's a free choice. Which hexagon, which triangle, which rhombus on which side of the paper. At some spacing, it will work out. And so in the starter sequence, I teach 4 of these patterns. I call this one Starry Sky, which becomes more apparent when you backlight it. And then we have Dancing Ribbons. Here, actually, we have those same triangle, rhombus, triangle structures that we saw in the previous tessellation. So this strip is the same as this strip. So you can start using these motifs in a variety of structures. And actually, that particular motif is one of the ones that started the design mindset for me. You can have these rings that are then spaced apart from other rings by having the open hexagon in the middle. You can do all kinds of wild and crazy things. And this one you could space even closer together to get a pattern that I taught in Advent of Tessellations in 2022. I think I called it Open Triangle Stars Gapped. But that's one of the great things about these patterns. So all of the ones actually that I've shown so far have a property, which is that every gap between one twist and another can be shrunk or expanded at will, as long as you do the same thing to all the other gaps. And even you can take some subset of the gaps and expand them. This isn't necessarily true for all patterns. And specifically with this next one, it is not the case. So with this one, we go hexagon, rhombus. And here, every single twist is in a position of rotational symmetry. The hexagon's in a position of 6-fold rotational symmetry, the rhombus is in a position of 2-fold rotational symmetry, and the triangle is in a position of 3-fold rotational symmetry. And what I learned after folding a ton of these kinds of patterns is that whenever you have the 3 symmetry positions, and for the vast majority of patterns there will be 3 symmetry positions, whenever you have those all inside of twists, you have more constraints on what you can do. So I'm seeing a question in the chat from Chris, what kind of paper am I using for these? I used Taunt for these, mostly because it does have more vibrant colors. And so sometimes I choose to use Taunt for teaching instead of Skytone. And it's readily available, already cut in squares. So that's why I used Taunt for this set. And back to the folding again, to the patterns. Here we see that same triangle, rhombus, triangle strip showing up in yet another context. We can take these twists, take these motifs, these connections between twists, and apply them in so many different ways once we understand, oh, here's the symmetry that I need to use, here's how things are going to connect. And when I'm designing patterns, I'm playing with twists like Lego blocks in my computer software. And that's actually, if you go to my website, training.gatheringfolds.com, you can find my crease pattern template files. And another question from Chris, how do I get the Taunt so big? I get the 30 centimeter squares. I was getting them from Origami Shop USA branch, but they closed down. There's still Origami Shop in France, but you would be paying for international shipping. And so you can have all these different variations. And even within that, so let's take these 2 patterns. They have the same center. It's just the triangle has changed and the way it repeats has changed. So instead of the rhombus being directly between 2 hexagons, I have this chunk and I've got some empty space all the way around it. And then that same chunk repeats exactly. So there's many ways of arranging these different motifs. Last but not least, I've got the right triangle. And this one, I mean, the rhombus also had rotational symmetry. So I guess this is the first of the basic twists that doesn't have rotational symmetry in and of itself. Like if I hold it this way, it looks different than if I hold it this way or this way or this way. And so all of the positions of rotational symmetry need to be outside of the twists. And you can take chunks and mirror them. I'll zoom out so y'all can see the whole pieces. You can have other chunks that are the same on both sides and mirror that. You can do straight alternation. So this is the same chunk with 2 on one side, 2 on the other side, that then just continues alternating sides. You can mix right triangles with squares. You can do that mirroring on the same side. You can do that with the stripes alternating sides. There's just so many options when it comes to origami tessellations. And one of the things that really helps when you're learning is to have a teacher, to have a mentor, a guide who has been through all of these different styles and can recommend, oh, fold this first, fold that next, and fold this one in this way, but that one in that way. Because if you were to try and fold this radially, when it's a pattern of stripes, you're going to have a bit of a harder time figuring out where everything needs to go. Whereas this pattern is mirrored radially, and so works well to start in the center and work your way out from there. But even then, there's some tricks to get things to work out nicely. And then you can take chunks where you have a closed square on one side, these 4 right triangles on the other, and alternate those chunks throughout the pattern. So, excuse me. So those are the 50 patterns that I teach in Tessellation Starter Sequence. And there I really am trying to take people through the entire process from learning the very basic skills, practicing the specific models, to learning the twists, practicing, okay, if I want to practice just this twist, how do I go about that? To learning the symmetries, the arrangements of twists. I talk a lot in those 50 lessons because we do see those repeats with different variations about, okay, this time we did it this way, next time we're going to do it slightly differently, but we're going to follow the same steps. And so we're going to be adding, say, a hexagon, and then the 6 triangles around that, and then the 6 hexagons around that, and the 6 triangles needed around that to resolve the pleat overlaps. We're going to be going around this way around the paper because our next twist is going to be up on the opposite side, or we're going to be going around this way because our next twist is on the same side. And so we're setting ourselves up for future success. And or like this pattern, we're going to be folding in rings around the center. That pattern, we're going to start in the center, but we're going to do a stripe out to the edges, and then we're going to do the next stripe and the next stripe and the next stripe and the next stripe on the other side. And seeing how the arrangement of shapes matches with the folding process. Seeing these different options available of like, I can make a chunk made of 4 triangle twists and then mirror it or alternate it on opposite sides of the paper. Seeing that you can arrange that hexagon, rhombus, triangle, rhombus bit with symmetry positions in every twist, or you can break symmetry and have those repeats be further away. So these are all ideas that start percolating. And also, what grid are we going to choose to do this tessellation on? How does the crease pattern inform that? How can we decide how many grid divisions we want in order to get such and such number of repeats? So these are all considerations as you're folding that start layering on. And then once you get to the designer phase, it's like, okay, we have this way of starting. Are there any other choices that can be made? And I can tell you, I'm gonna go ahead and say, as a mathematical fact, there are always changes that can be made. It's just a matter of whether you're willing to fold enough grid to see it play out, and get to a repeat. So there's a huge world of different things to do with origami tessellations. And I walked you through kind of the more basic end of the difficulty scale. You can also get to things like what I'm folding right now for fun, where I have these pentagon shapes and these triangle shapes that are actually hexagon twists under the hood because they have 6 pleats. So let's say this one has 1, 2, 3, there's a 4th one tucked underneath, 5, 6, that is a hexagon twist. It's a hybrid hexagon twist. And then, and actually that's one of the hybrids that's not part of the 30 that I mentioned earlier. This triangle one is part of the 30, and you can find a tutorial on it on my YouTube channel right now. But at every corner of this twist, we have one pleat that's clearly visible and one that's tucked under. And so we're able to get this structure where we have each hexagon surrounded by 6 triangles, each triangle surrounded by 3 hexagons. We're using that structure, but we're placing the symmetries further away. So for this pattern, I've got the position of 6-fold rotational symmetry in the center. That's why I've folded it on a hexagonal sheet of paper. And then the 3-fold position is actually in the middle of this 3-fold hybrid hexagon twist. And the 2-fold position is in between these 2 pentagon hybrid hexagons. So this one is exactly the same as this one rotated halfway around the point in the middle. So there's a never-ending journey when it comes to mastering origami tessellations, because the tessellations themselves don't have limits. There's no limit to what you can fold even with the basic twists. And then once you start adding in those more advanced twists, the other 22 plus of the 30 that I mentioned, I'll be doing a deeper dive into this summer. There's really no end to what you can fold with origami tessellations, which is rather fitting because there's no end to any individual pattern itself. So one of the last things that I want to go through is like, what are the main methods of learning origami tessellations? Because it's changed a lot since I started folding them in 2017. So when I started, there were around 2 or 3 books on the topic. There was Origami Tessellations by Eric Giardi. Alessandro Beber had his Origami New Worlds book. And I don't remember exactly when Ilan Garibi published his Origami Tessellations for Everyone, which there is now a volume 2 of. Ben Parker has his 6 Simple Twists book. And there's also now books by Miguel Gagnon, Ekaterina Lukasheva with the curved folding. The original books were published in Japanese by Shuzo Fujimoto in the 70s. And those actually are public domain now. If you go to the CFC site, which I have a link in the description under the conventions header, the convention for, or community for creators, convention for creators, us origami tessellation design, or origami designers in general, get together and talk. There's a variety of books, and there's also other crease patterns available that people have published on their own websites or on sites like Flickr. And so there's quite a few books now, not so many focused on these broader applications of saying, okay, where's the symmetry? How do you read a crease pattern? You're just expected to read the crease pattern and follow the instructions, and getting into these things. So for me, the best way to teach origami tessellations has been through video. And that's why all of my tutorial videos are here on YouTube, and all of my courses are in video format with some crease pattern accompaniments. So there's tutorial videos, there's books and crease patterns, there's challenges that I like to put together. So Advent of Tess, I ran in 2022 and 2023. There's Yes, plans for another. And that's a challenge where you learn just a little bit of a tessellation. And you're able to build your skills gradually because I've planned the curriculum to add just one new idea each day. And that's kind of the idea with Summer of Twists coming up too. And there's, all kinds of fun things that'll be going on with that. Then there's conventions and in-person workshops. Now this is often hard for people to do because one, tessellations tend to be fairly small. It's hard to teach tessellations with a giant sheet of paper because you need to be manipulating multiple parts of it at a time. You usually need to be doing that flat on a desk. And if you're sitting across from someone, you need to be able to rotate what they're doing in your brain for you to be able to duplicate it. And one of the things that my students have told me is they actually usually prefer recordings over live sessions for folding along with, because they can go back and see the same step multiple times before doing it themselves. So in-person events, you can certainly learn tessellations there, but it's generally a short enough time frame that you're not going to learn, say, a curriculum. You're going to be staying in that model mindset of, okay, our goal is to fold this specific thing, and we're not going to learn anything about how to create variations, what other rules you can derive from the folding. And so that's a nice way to learn models, but not necessarily a way to learn to design tessellations. I've been talking about my own online courses. I have a whole list of them down in the description. And there's also the way that I learned myself. There's photos and photo tutorials, mostly on Flickr. And I've linked the biggest collection of origami tessellation images with over 1,000 photos, which is that Flickr group that was really instrumental in showing me the possibilities for origami tessellations. And for me, I'm a person who's very visual. I can visualize things in my head. I can see how things were put together and what I need to do to make my paper look like the photo. And so I was able to jump straight to reverse engineering after learning a couple twists. And I reverse engineered 150, 200 patterns before I had an awareness of, oh, all of these hexagon patterns that have just hexagons and triangles, they have the hexagon surrounded by 6 triangles and the triangle surrounded by 3 hexagons. And it doesn't matter what triangle you use on what side of the paper or what hexagon you use. So it takes some extra time without the explicit instruction to build an awareness of how things are actually working. So that's what I have to say about how to study origami tessellations. If you have more questions, feel free to put those in the chat or in the comments below the recording. I'm seeing a question about how can you reverse engineer the hardest models by Joel Cooper? And I'm going to say start by reverse engineering the easiest models by Joel Cooper. Figure out what each individual piece is. Learn the building blocks. And then see, okay, for Joel's stuff in particular, he's usually using some kind of isoarea hexagon. He's usually using some bit of paper that isn't exactly a twist, that's had some of the pleats reversed. And so see if you can figure out what one tiny chunk of the pattern is doing, and then figure out what the next tiny chunk of the pattern is doing. Figure out how those chunks are connected. And once you've figured out all the tiny chunks, then you've figured out the whole pattern. So we always want to break things down to make it as easy as possible to figure out. So for example, if I have, let's take actually a pattern that was one of the ones that I reverse engineered when I was learning myself. I call this one picture frames. I'm not sure exactly who originally folded it. I would place bets on Christiane Bettens, but I'm not sure exactly. So what you do is you go in and you say, okay, each of these squares are exactly the same. And then you say, okay, these are all made of closed right triangle twists, and there's something else going on at those 4 points on the inside, or in the middle of the edge of the square. And then you say, well, and the tip of the triangle is coming right to that position as well. There are 3 pleats. It's easier when you have the pattern in your hand. There are 3 pleats going into that position. And if you're lucky enough to have a photo of the back side as well, you can say those squares are showing up on the back. So these squares on the front, and if you have backlighting, so I'll bring up backlighting. With the backlighting, you notice, okay, the squares on this side are not exactly lined up with the squares on that side. And so you can say, okay, we have these other squares on the back. These are all closed right triangle twists. And I'm going to have places where I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them going around in a loop, and places where I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. Are there any other places? Actually, no. Exactly. It's an Origami tessellation of closed right triangle twists. And so on the other side, you can see exactly the same thing. And every twist is on the opposite side from the 3 twists around it. How do I know there are 3 twists around it? Well, there are 3 pleats coming out of the twist. And so there's going to be the same number of twists around a given twist as there are pleats coming off of the twist, because there's no pleats that just go out to the edge and don't connect to anything. And so I can look at it and say, okay, I've got exactly the same twist repeating everywhere on this side, and it's behaving in exactly the same way on the other side. So I can say at the pointy corners, the next twist is going to have its closed hole right at the corner. On the right angle corners, the closed hole is going to be 1 spacing away. And we're working in loops of 8 and loops of 4. So these right angle corners are going to be in closer to each other. And that's as much as I need. That's as much of a description as I need to fold the entire thing. Now, having a video tutorial, like what's in Tessellation Starter Sequence, is going to be really helpful on the mechanics of like how precisely do I go about folding this, because this is fairly dense. It is equal numbers of twists on both sides. So you do end up flipping the paper over a lot. But if you have the image, if you can break it down into what is my repeating unit, then you can reverse engineer whatever pattern you like. It's a little bit harder with patterns like the one that I'm folding for myself, where it's using 1, 2, 3 different hexagon twists and 2 different triangle twists. And by the way, these triangles out here are a different position relative to the symmetries than these open triangles in here. And so you're able to get all of this different variation within the same pattern. So that's kind of my recommendations for studying the tessellations. If you can see the symmetries yourself and you're willing to put in the time and effort to reverse engineer things, then you can totally figure things out on your own. There's a lot more video tutorials than when I started. And then I'm seeing a question, your parents are saying to stop doing origami. What do you say? Well, origami has become the big thing in mechanical engineering and architecture these days. So not only are you providing ways to keep yourself occupied that are developing skills in your brain of visualization and persistence that are necessary in pretty much any creative career, any engineering or STEM career, but you're also training yourself in the specific skills of folding that are starting to be in higher demand in engineering and architecture, and to some degree in mathematics and art and all of these different fields. Now, I'm not saying that you should do origami for the money, but I'm saying that it's a good argument to give to your parents because they'll want to know that you're actually doing something valuable for your future. And also, like, for why a person should continue doing origami for themselves. Origami has a huge community that is incredibly helpful and supportive. And when you start going to origami conventions, you can make so many friends at conventions that you wouldn't meet any other way. And you can really be part of a global community that is really focused on the development of the community and getting more and more people into origami, into designing, into publishing their origami designs. So there's a lot of reasons to keep folding, and I'd encourage anyone out there to give tessellations a try, to see and challenge yourself with how far you can go with this intricate, yes, mathematical, yes, and that's some of what the appeal is, with this art form that fuses both handmade things and the laws of mathematics. Now, making money by doing origami, that is a perennial question. There are people who do origami for money, myself included. And it's not something that I would recommend doing for the money. But if you can't see yourself doing anything other than origami, then give it a try. It's kind of like the line, like, don't be an artist unless you can't not be an artist. So there's some, like, teaching in schools works for some people. Doing large scale installation pieces works for some people. Doing consulting and folding for advertisements and engineering projects works for some people. And teaching courses and running memberships works for some other people. It's really varied depending on the precise kind of origami you like to do and what your focus is. So this this concludes our discussion on studying origami tessellations, and I will see you all next week. I do encourage you to to keep talking in the chat and talk to each other as well, and I'll chime in as needed. So happy folding, everyone, and talk to you later.